Like in the first 2 decades of Africa's independence, when the end of colonialism served as the initial condition for development planning. For development planners and planning in Africa's 21st century, the lost decades of the 1980s and the 1990s will have to serve as the new initial condition. 6 slides that will seek to capture these initial conditions and the lessons that need to be taken forward in rethinking Africa's development planning. The current slides, for instance, relate to the crisis of the terms of trade that faces countries whose engagement in international economy is based primarily on the exports of primary commodities. The health and overall performance of the economies that depend on primary commodity exports depends on the action of external orders in terms of the price and the volume of the demand for the primary commodities. The producers of primary commodities in Africa do not get to define or determine the price or the volume of products. While the terms of trade between 1990 and 1980 was reasonably favorable, this turned negative after 1980, with the attendant balance of payment and fiscal crisis. Similarly, the commodity cycles of high swings in prices followed by price collapse, which we notice especially in the case of energy products like petroleum and so on and so forth, played themselves out between 2002 and 2008, and between 2010 and 2020, most especially. Agricultural primary producers face the difficulties of engaging in international trade based on commodities that are not particularly income elastic. In other words, the demand for their commodity does not necessarily correlate with improvement or increase in income elasticity in income of the consumer. A common example, a simple example would be the consumption of coffee. If somebody was earning, $100 a month, and you drink a cup of coffee a day, and then you start earning $1 million. You don't drink 1,000 cups of coffee a day. You're probably going to invest in better coffee machines and so on and so forth, rather than just the consumption of the coffee. Mineral producers in the area of fossil fuel, for instance, face the added long-term difficulties of the increased role of renewable energy and electric vehicles in reducing the demand for their products. And in this particular context, it's not just about the current environment. A classical example was what happened with rubber, production of rubber, or the demand for rubber, when petroleum byproducts, for instance, started replacing rubber in the production of plastics and so on and so forth. A further issue of the 1980s and the 1990s, serving as the new initial condition, relates to what happened to gross domestic savings. As the figure in the 13th and the 16th, 15th slide show, the period before 1980s showed a gradual but persistent increase in gross domestic savings. The period after 1980s, within the context of neoliberal structural adjustment program, has seen a collapse in gross domestic savings, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. By contrast, if you look at the second chart, here, we see a persistent improvement in gross domestic savings in East Asia and the Pacific region. This is part of the indicative measures, or what Kandawere referred to as the maladjustment of African economies under structural adjustment program. Domestic savings, both public and private savings, are essential for the mobilization of resources for financing development. Slide 14 is instructive in terms of illustrating Africa's lost decades. While per capita income increased between 1960 and the late, mid to late 1970s, the 2 decades after that was of a collapse in per capita income. It took 2011 for per capita income to return to the level it was in 1974, almost 3 decades earlier. Read together, slides 16 and 17 show the low level, of merchandise exports, excluding oil, across the period 1970 to 2000 and 2000, and the meager share of Africa in global manufacturing exports, with only a negligible increase between 2005 and 2013. Over the period, China in particular and East Asia broadly have increased their share of manufacturing exports. The anti-industrial policy neoliberal mantra of the 1980s and the 1990s are as wrong-headed as one can be. Because both in the East Asian context, for instance, it was attention to industrial policy and its dynamic use that allowed for this increase in global share in manufacturing exports. What the COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us of are the concerns over the lost decades and the maladjustment of Africa since the 1980s. The stomping of industrialization projects of 1960s and 1970s and the deindustrialization in some cases deepened the informalization of Africa's economy. The low productivity concerns of the informal sector, plus the labor market poor regulation, combined with low income and the non-existence of social insurance, protection. The stomping of industrial policies in the 1980s made for low manufacturing capacity, with limited capacity for endogenously grounded manufacture of high-tech products for use in responding to the pandemic. Years of underinvestment in public health service will have opened the continent to high mortality rates from the pandemic if the initial projected numbers had been realized. Similar relative weakness in investment in national system of innovation, higher education, research, national research facilities, and national research capability, are also there, and they are reflected in the fact that, to give an example, there is no national vaccine production effort currently in place on the continent. The vaccine response has been limited mainly to coordinating vaccine procurement when one or more is available. Happily though, in relation to the pandemic itself, the prediction of a devastating impact on the continent in terms of infection and fatality rates has not materialized. Yet, the issues above raise the significance of a knowledge-driven, manufacturing-based development pathway for Africa in a new way. Now we turn to the issues of the principles and the political economy of development planning. In thinking about the issues around development planning, it is important to highlight several salient issues that have been on Africa's agenda since the Lagos Plan of Action of 1979, which was an initiative of the Organization of African Union, which is now the African Union, Organization of African Unity, and which is now African Union, and the UN Economic Commission for Africa. First is the importance of thinking of national development planning in the context of regional development and regional development planning. The need to pool resources in the area of infrastructure, especially power supply, for instance, becomes essential. Power generating capacity, for example, varies between countries. Similarly, regional coordination is vital for mitigating the adverse effects of small states and small population and small markets. It is also crucial in the context of regional coordination to pay attention to mitigating what Gunnar Myrdal identify as backwash effects, while enhancing what we may call the spread effect. Development, even growth, creates benefits and costs. Centers of industrial productions are likely to attract the inflow of human material resources and wealth, which can be to the detriment of outlying regions, and then draining this, outlining, what do you call it, adjoining regions, of human resources and wealth. This is the example of the backwash effect. The spread effect, on the other hand, is the positive sharing of the benefit of development and economic growth by different regions. Attention needs to be paid to mitigating backwash effect and enhancing spread effect nationally and regionally. Location of industry and other development projects, as well as the provision of infrastructure to reduce the cost of doing business, is quite essential. The importance of the pursuit of industrialization in an ecologically friendly way is the degree to which the engine of growth of economies are internalized, in other words, located within the countries and the regions themselves. In addition to the production of commodities that generally are more income elastic, manufacturing output allows for synergies with innovation and drive innovation capacity within a particular country. Research and development effort, funded and supported through investment in national research and education institutions, build linkages with different sectors of the economy, ensuring intersectoral linkages is vital in the development planning efforts. Intermediate processing plants with adequate infrastructure support, for instance, can be located close to areas of agricultural production, as an example. Similarly, social and economic aspects of planning need to be foregrounded and integrated. This will range from investment in human resources development to support economic development. It will involve investment in health infrastructure, housing, transport, education, which underpins the needs of the economic development and ensure equitable distribution of the benefits of development. Again, these are fundamental aspects of the linkages between social policy social policy and economic policy as components of development and development planning. It makes it easy to create an environment of equitable outcomes that makes long-term development sustainable. It mitigates the cost of development, which can be quite disruptive socially while enhancing the welfare outcomes for all. A starting point about development planning is that it is driven by what I would call visionary agenda setting. What is at stake is a vision of a desired state to which a society aspires. It is about seeking to map a path to a destination that in the current context is a matter of dreams or imagination. Such visions of the future are contested, and arriving at a shared vision of the future is a vital aspect of mobilizing national energy and drive to achieve it. This will require a national sense of ownership in the vision. In this regard, crafting of national development should be understood as a nationwide mobilization effort across class, ethnicity, regions, and religions. The level of inclusivity in the different phases of development planning is essential for ensuring ownership and national commitment. Central to this, of course, that development planning, monitoring and evaluation and everything and so on and so forth requires considerable technical capacity. But development planning is both a technical as well as a political project. Extensive consultation is necessary. So development planning is not simply a technical effort. As important as technical competence is for a successful development effort, planning is as much a political project as it is a technical one. A national development plan in Lesotho cannot merely be something drafted by a team of consultants drawn from a consultancy firm in New York. Even where non-national expert is required, this must be embedded within the national process of determining the development vision and mapping out the development pathways. While development planning requires input from different sectors of the economy and government departments, I will argue, and this is a personal opinion, I will argue that it may be prudent to vest the project itself in a distinct national planning commission. This allows for the concentration of expertise drawn from diverse disciplines, not merely economists. The planning commission, I would suggest or recommend, needs to be such that it carries the authority of the country's leadership. In other words, it's as part of the Prime Minister's office or within the presidency, or as part of the presidency itself. Good planning, as Todd Littman notes, requires a methodical process that clearly defines the steps that lead to optimal solutions. Among the process involved are important principles such as comprehensiveness, efficiency, inclusivity, that is informative, it's integrated, it's logical, and it's transparent. It's comprehensive. The plan is comprehensive in sense, but it's sufficiently comprehensive in that it ensures that all significant options and impacts are considered. In addition to guaranteeing essential connectedness between different projects, the assessment of the social and environmental impacts of individual projects should be undertaken by experts. While social and environmental impact cannot be eliminated, efforts must be made to minimize the adverse impacts of development projects on the environment and on people. The comprehensiveness of the process will also involve detailed attention to the financing of the plan. Resources have to be secured for the implementation of the plan without jeopardizing the fiscal health of the economy. The prior existence of an inclusive development plan ensures a rational basis for engaging with state donors, both in securing finance and preventing donor-driven projects that are at variance with the development plan. In other words, having your development plan in place allows you a platform and a basis for negotiating with donors, even if you require development finance, and being able to say, we need money in this area, we don't need money in this area, we can handle this area ourselves, and somebody's offering you assistance. A plan allows you to say, we need assistance in this area, thank you. If you want to offer us assistance, this is the area in which you offer the assistance, not the areas where you initially thought you have to do, you're offering it. The plan has to be efficient in the choice of implementation method and techniques need to be as efficient as possible. In other words, to minimize cost, ensure on-time delivery of the project. The design process and the impact assessment will be necessary for determining the most efficient time and cost for the implementation of projects. Projects may require requisition of land, relocation of people, but this needs to be done with a sense of inclusivity and efficiently. In the immediate terms, whatever the long-term positive impacts of the project and the development effort, it is important that we minimize the cost that the project will impose on people. Sensitivity in the proceeding is essential in minimizing the level of short-term adverse impact, and adequate provision of an alternative location, for instance, is important while using the efforts to enhance the well-being of the affected segment of the population. A national development project is an important opportunity for national mobilization, as I mentioned earlier on. Creating national conversation and dialogue and building ownership. This takes time. Technical efficiency does not translate into political efficiency. Something may be technically prudent, but not politically prudent. And inclusivity is important in ensuring ownership, and making the plan itself and its implementation sustainable. This is particularly so in the context of liberal democratic systems of governance, when there is no guarantee that the political party that drove the development plan will be in office for its implementation. The level of national ownership around the plan is important in ensuring commitments to the plan, regardless of which the party is in power. Part of the process of ensuring inclusive development planning is information sharing. So the planning process serves to be informative. It's in the dissemination and ensuring that all stakeholders are adequately informed about every stage of the process. It is important that it is integrated, ensuring a synergistic connection with different parts of the overall plan is vital for its rationality and ensuring successful implementation. The plan and the linkages with the sub-projects also need to be logical. The logical sequencing of the project becomes exceptionally important, and ensuring that supporting infrastructure, for instance, are in place before the commencement of the project that depends on the infrastructure. So the sequencing itself has to be incredibly logical, to guarantee efficiency, to reduce cost, and to minimize, as much as possible, disruption to people's life. And it has to be transparent. In other words, in ensuring inclusivity and ownership of the plan, the transparency of the plan initiation, project design, and implementation should be available to and understood by all stakeholders. And this requires efforts not just in urban or peri-urban areas, but in the rural areas, in explaining, in engaging with different segments of the population, in ensuring that both in terms of cost and benefits of the plan, in terms of the processes, for instance, is transparent and the information is widely available to all. Transparency is vital in mitigating the adverse impact of insufficient or false information. And this particularly becomes important in the age of social media, when fake news can easily quite spread. It requires the use of a diversity of information outlets to reach a diverse range of national and local stakeholders. In terms of the planning framework, it's important to understand that the planning framework is concerned with what Lichtman refers to as the basic planning process structure. This applies as much to project planning as it does to comprehensive development plan. In this sense, there are issues of principles which refers to the basic rules or concept used for decision making. The question of vision, in other words, there has to be a clarity of the desired states for which the plan aims and for which the different articulated components of the plans are intended to achieve. It's a question of problem. As much as it's possible, every conceivable condition that can be that can adversely impact the accomplishment of the goals in a cost and time efficient manner is identified before the commencement of the plan or sub-project. Now, in many instances, conditions will emerge during the plan implementation process that will adversely affect the plan or the project for which one could not plan. Available expertise, and here technical competence and the immense availability of of mobilizing technical capacity becomes quite important. Technical competence needs to be available and at hand to find solutions. Problem-solving skills of an engineer will be a desirable type to have in abundance in this particular context. The goals have to be quite clear, desirable condition to achieve as part of the visionary agenda setting will be necessary part of the framework. As Lichtman notes, for instance, these are usually goals are generally too general to be quantified. Objectives, on the other hand, are more specific and potentially quantifiable to achieve the goals of a plan. Targets needs to be clearly set. These are more measurable deliverables, and then there have to be performance indicators, practical ways to measure progress towards development objective. Milestones have to be clearly stated. What needs to be achieved has to be clearly stated. At what time, so that it's possible to measure when you are falling behind in the achievement of particular, accomplishment of certain objective, or when in fact you achieve the objectives well before the set milestone. Plans are as a set of actions are generally more strategic in something like a development plan, but can involve the process of the conceptualization, the design, and the implementation of a project. It will involve clear identification of alternative methods of implementation, in other words, diverse options, the selection of the optimal ways of implementing the plan. Embedded within these are policies and strategies, which will be a course of action to be implemented. Programs will involve a specific set of objectives and responsibility and tasks to be implemented, which in turn involves an interlocking set of tasks and actions within the specific scope or range that will be included in the process. This will involve the areas, the people, the time, the activities that will be components of the implementation process. Even plans need to have built into them evaluation criteria, the methodology for evaluation, and the time frame for evaluation. Generally, targets are set, and the milestone for achieving the targets are made clear as part of the planning process. In a 25-year strategic plan, which are set in broad terms of the desired state to be achieved, you have rolling plans, usually 5-year plans, which are developed to sequence the stages in the achievement of the strategic objective. What you expect in plan 1 of the 5-year plan, second 5-year plan, third 5-year plan, fourth 5-year plan, and so on and so forth. And in relation to the rolling plans themselves, you have the annual budget, which will be designed to have stage implementation of the rolling plan. So there's a 5-year plan. The objective and the essence of the annual plan is to achieve sequentially set targets and move towards the achievement of the objective and the vision set out in the 5-year rolling plan as part of what you call the achievement of the strategic plan, let's say 5-year strategic plan. So the annual plan is intended as the sequential implementation of the 5-year rolling plan. The 5-year rolling plans is supposed to be part of the sequential implementation of, say, the 25-year strategic plan. It is therefore possible to say in a 5-year development plan, to set in a 5-year development plan and build into it annual reviews of the target as part of the planning process. In addition to this, you can have a mid-term review, which may be built into the plan evaluation process to determine how the targets have been achieved or not achieved, and where targets are not achieved, to understand why. Why targets are or overachieved, it may require what you call a shifting resources into other areas as part of achieving the overall 5-year plan. So in other words, you don't wait until the end of the 5-year plan before you get a sense of where you're going and how well you are achieving the targets. The mid-term review It's also another critical time to communicate, to mobilize, in addition to evaluate, communicate with stakeholders, with population, and mobilize the population. It is another stage in the planning process that is at once technical and in the work of experts and political for mobilizing and animating the different stakeholders. Targets may be readjusted as a result of the midterm reviews, but the ultimate objective is a renewed commitment to the aim of reaching the desired goal. The objective of the social policy for development planners in the context of COVID-19 is primarily to ask, what question does one ask of one social policy in the context of development? What are the specific of such questions in the context of a pandemic? This model has the intention to frame the idea of development, trace its genealogy, and demarcate the diversity of its meaning. The emphasis in this model has been on development as structural transformation of economy and society, with an emphasis on the use of industrial policy in achieving the transformation of the economy. The focus is on a development process that is inclusive, democratic, and ecologically sustainable. At the heart of such efforts is a focus on equity, gender, intergenerational, ethnic, and regional. In other words, these diverse dimensions of what you call equity. It is in this context that we set the political economy and the principles of development planning. Equity and inclusivity are not treated and are not end products of development. They're not things you achieve after you develop. They are the means of achieving development. That again returns us to the questions of social policy. In addition to the quiz, that has been provided for this model, there are, what do you call it, discussion points, which can happen perhaps at a later stage in the what do you call it, model implementation. I thank you all.